Good evening, science fiction, mystery, and thriller fans. We are here with episode 30 for book 3 of the Guardsman series. This is Wrath and Retribution. We are going to read chapter 73 today. When you get a chance at the finish, please check out the like, subscribe, and leave a nice comment. Love to hear from you. And if you're really interested, there'll be a link for the book down in the description. Please enjoy.
The Guardsman, Book 3, Wrath and Retribution. Episode 30, Chapter 73. Chapter 73. Samson hadn't realized just how much he hurt until the pain was gone. He still had his few raw and superficial flesh wounds, but his hyper-extended hip and knee both flexed normally without pain thanks to Sean's patient guidance of his nanobots to repair those areas. He could also finally turn his head and neck and move with a greater range of motion than he had since he'd fought on Friday night. The muscle relaxants were still swimming happily through his system, making him feel a little tired, and physically he felt slightly mushy all over, but really nice. The 10,000 little fingers that tickled him through the electrodes in the recovery ward hospital cot's surface worked his muscles, while the gentle traction from the chiropractic winches gently supported his head while pulling his repaired legs. Every action was monitored by the automated system to ensure flexion and motion were even and distributed as the dislocated and pinched vertebrae of his neck and back snapped themselves one by one into proper alignment. Samson felt positively spry after the repairs and a few hours of firm but gently progressing relaxation and straightening tension from the automated system. Persephone was absolutely frisky at the prospect of Sean releasing Samson with a clean bill of health. She had only departed his side briefly and returned almost instantly during his muscle relaxation and traction work early in the day. In the middle of the afternoon, she had received a package that turned out to be a completely new uniform complete with the unique gold embroidered High Commander rank insignia. She was absolutely thrilled and practically bouncing with excitement as he unwrapped her gift and thanked her for it with a smile of his own. Sean highlighted the inadequate level of Samson's recovery late afternoon, after those many hours of work. While leaning forward with no shirt on under Sean's steadily careful hands, Samson mouthed off about not needing the doctor in the first place. Sean made his point. Sean slapped the large adhesive bandage over one of the last untreated and open blood blisters on his back, hard, causing Samson to wince in pain and groan like a wide-eyed little child. The not-so-gentle reminder applied with Sean's palm to his back on one of his most minor wounds reminded Samson just how swamped his brain had been with pain those few short hours before Sean began his diligent care. Sean finished his wound care and gave his rote warning about the muscle relaxants in Samson's system. "Listen up, stupid guardsman. You will be drowsy and can suffer vision and balance deficiencies for the next several hours until your body processes the mega doses of drugs I've pumped into your system. Since you're not a normal human, and you've got all your little helpers in your blood, your nanos clean out the drugs faster than most. But to get the required pharmacological effects, I had to flood your system and overload their ability to process the drugs. I will not fix you if you are an idiot and work with the excessive weight you fool guardsmen toss around in the gym. You will rip out your joints because your ligaments and tendons aren't meant to stretch that far. Not to mention the same support structures in your skeletal system that you are working out will be loosened, increasing your chances of separations and muscle tears, making them more catastrophic should they happen." Sean stepped forward half a step and leaned in slightly until he recaptured Samson's wandering eyes before continuing. "Going to the gym after injuries like this and working out doesn't make you hardcore or whatever else you bloody idiots call it. Going to the gym now and abusing your healing body is nothing but patent stupidity. You will have plenty of time for properly metered workouts once you have recovered from your injuries. You're only enhanced, you're not immortal." Samson grumbled almost pitifully. "Well, can I at least stretch?" Persephone was inhaling to start huffing her own angry correction at Samson's side when Sean beat her to the reply, "Yes." Her eyes snapped knowingly from the side of Samson's head to Sean's at his reply before he could caveat his own statement. She knew Samson would take that as a blank check to do as he pleased. He could weasel a lot into the broad category of stretching. Sean continued, "But that means only for mobility and flexibility, slow and deliberate movements to keep your muscles and joints moving properly and to prevent stiffening. That does not mean that you can hold weights that are half again your own body's mass and stretch with those in your hands while ripping apart your muscles and throwing out your newly repaired and aligned back. You may use natural resistance and your own body weight only." Sean smirked evilly. "I seem to remember that Miss Persephone made quite a habit of dancing when she was younger. Maybe she can put you through a routine or two, and you the big tough guardsman can learn that you don't have a monopoly on hard work, as she sweats you and makes you squeal through dips and splits." Persephone beamed at the prospect, while Samson tried his most evil scowl that Sean deflected with a dismissive hand wave before turning away and muttering over his shoulder as he walked away, "Samson, you're released to Persephone's supervision. Don't let him do anything stupid, Persephone." As he hit the threshold for the automatic door to his office, he looked back disinterestedly. "Don't forget to change the bandages tomorrow. Keep the wounds clean, and I don't want to see either of you again until your next annual physicals." He wandered into his office, and before the door closed, even though it was actually early afternoon, Sean called back, "Good night," as the door automatically shut behind him. Samson dressed quickly and was pleased to find that Persephone had not only remembered his size, but had managed to get the uniform tailored, and she had somehow retrieved a pair of his own boots. The only other occupant of the room lay chemically unconscious and wrapped in her bandages, with tubes draining all manner of fluids and medications, some of them like synthesized temporary blood with no genetic markers of its own, plasma, and very low-powered basic nanobot infusion solutions they recognized. But others could only be guessed at without reading the nearly nonsensical chemical names stenciled in the bags that fed into the medical monitoring machinery. Diantha looked more like a body undergoing the mummification process than a living human. The feeding tube down her throat was slowly passing a milky white liquid, and the blood draining into her put that notion to rest. The synthesized blood and feeding tube fluids would both provide nutrients Diantha needed to recover her own lost blood and heal naturally. Samson was all too familiar with synthesized blood replacing his own. He shuddered involuntarily thinking about that horrible wreck. Persephone's hand slipped gently into his, and she whispered, "Come on." She gently steered him away from the medical ward to the door. "Sean will take good care of her," she consoled. Samson wondered if that was for his benefit or her own as they reached the ward's door, and she punctuated with, "You'll see." She guided them out of the ward, both her arms wrapped around his left arm, as they took the narrow and quiet family corridors and restricted access elevators keyed to her palm print and security codes. She didn't say a word as she led him down the corridors. They had spent so much time walking together, but had missed each other for so many months. He didn't bother talking because he was just happy to not be in the hospital any longer than required, and freely walking under his own power. Persephone led them up and up and up, to the very top of the citadel where it began to appreciably narrow in its graceful domed shape. She had her destination in mind, but Samson didn't guess it until she passed her rooms and towards her parents' suite. She swiped her palm over the reader pad on the door as she whisked him into the family library. She had always loved the huge domed windows that captured a full quarter of the western sky and the setting sun. It was a luxury that next to no one in their massive city could enjoy, but she did it to the fullest at every opportunity. Those opportunities had been lacking the last many months that she had been a fugitive with Samson. Samson quietly rolled his eyes as she moved to monopolize her mother's favorite chair. The miracle melding of technology and base comforts appeared to be a simple leather lounging couch. Instead, it sensed body positioning and could conform to perfect comfort and support based on natural instinctual comfort movements, like leg positioning or movements of shoulders and bottom. Its micro-perforated leather could either wisp cool, comforting air to prevent the discomfort of sticking to the chair, or it could operate in the opposite direction by providing a sinfully comfortable massage with tempered heating, all of which was guided by a learning algorithm that sensed and pampered its primary user. Samson felt his trepidation rising as she dragged him to her mother's forbidden throne. "Persephone, what are you doing?" Almost happily she replied, "We're going to work on your stretching and make sure your back doesn't get stiff." Samson wanted to sigh as she turned and positioned him before the seat. "Persephone, I don't think this is what Sean had in mind when he was talking about stretching and staying limber." Disinterested in the instructions, since she now had her own plan, he noticed she casually ignored his protest and pushed him back into the couch until he was forced to sit. "Stay," she commanded as she leaned over to his right and fiddled with the controls at the front of the couch's right arm. It began to move and adjust under him, before she happily knocked him over, lifted and dragged his boots past the left arm of the couch. The lounger automatically conformed to his new position, articulating underneath him as warming air slipped into his uniform from the underside, and the leather cushions under his back started to ripple. Pleased with her handiwork, but not finished, she fiddled with the controls a little more and raised his head and back, dropped his bottom, forcing a slight bend in his legs. He fought the urge to make any sound of approval for fear of encouraging her. He finally groaned and corrected her. "Persephone, you know your mother will do backflips if she catches anyone in her chair. Why are you setting us up for failure like this?" Persephone huffed her annoyance. "Quiet you. My mother dear is busy doing mother dearest things. She has a ladies' meeting in the Abbey, followed by a public relations review before lunch. After that she has a land holdings and assets review," Persephone obviously quoting. "And after all that she has a political type meet and greet thingy that will take all afternoon through dinner time. She'll be busy for hours." Half accusingly Samson demanded, "And how do you know all this?" Her hands landed on her hips as she scowled down at him. "Some of us kept working and talking to each other while you slept for the last day you know. She told me yesterday morning before you woke up." She smiled her devil's smile, and Samson had just enough time for his eyes to go wide before she jumped and pounced on him. He groaned while she squirmed and got herself comfortable across his lap and tucked her legs under his. She had managed to leave her shoes on the floor. It was nice to have her snugly against him. As his left arm fell over her shoulder, she leaned up and kissed his chin. The pragmatist in Samson forced him to speak up, against his own will. "You know we spent most of the day with Sean, and Celine could have finished any one of those meetings early." She shifted so she was looking straight down at him, and smiled the special smile that she reserved only for him. "Spoil sport." She leaned in for a gentle kiss that kindled more and more passion between the two of them until she was firmly in his arms, hers under his shoulders pulling him closer, and neither coming up for air, until the door opened. Persephone jumped at the noise, banging their teeth together and leaving both holding abused lips. Celine's arms dropped to her side, leather-bound book in hand, fingers drumming on her opposite hip, and obviously chewing her lip as thunder rolled behind her eyes. "Persephone Apollonia Kroinos," Celine fumed into the pause after using her daughter's full name indicating her level of fury. "If you too—" "Soil my chair," You will replace it, and then I will strip your skin off in small pieces for a wall hanging." She turned and was gone before either could blink. When Samson finally spoke, he grumbled first. "Good call on that won't be done for hours bit. Remind me to never listen to you again, ever." She sighed, repositioned herself so she was lying comfortably along his chest and the back of the couch looked up, and kissed his jaw before mumbling, "Shut up, you." Not 5 minutes later, one of Selline's 4 uniquely white-clad guardsmen knocked, and was admitted at Persephone's word to the computerized door lock. The guardsman had full access, but he was just being polite, she realized. She was stumbling to her feet as the guardsman stepped forward crisply out of the door's threshold and snapped a crisp salute with his high-caliber weapon perfectly vertical across his face. Persephone stepped to the side as Samson stood, took a second to remember his own rank, and crisply returned the salute. The captain spoke crisply, "High Commander, CEO Kroinos requests your presence in his office, sir." Samson nodded, understanding the immediate recall to duty. "Understood, Captain Lobo. Is there anything else?" The captain spoke crisply, "Sir, Lady Selline requests that Lady Persephone follow me and join her immediately in the lounge." Samson's eyes flicked to her as Persephone managed to pout and grumble at the same time. That was fast. Samson's eyes flicked back to Captain Lobo. "Understood, Captain." Captain Lobo snapped a second crisp rifle salute and belted, "Sir." By his tone and held salute, Samson could tell Lobo had something else to say. He slowly asked, "Yes, Captain?" Captain Lobo barked, "It's good to have you back, sir." Samson fought the smile that his time in civilian exile had almost allowed to slip past the creeping return of a lifetime's worth of discipline, filed down with so much time dealing with civilians. Instead, he snapped a perfect salute, in his perfect new High Commander's uniform. "It's good to be back, Captain." Persephone huffed and pouted for a second before stepping forward to kiss his cheek. She whispered to him only, "I love you. Don't let that old coot give you any trouble. I'll see you at dinner." Samson held his discipline-schooled face under the eyes of his patiently waiting fellow guardsman. He quietly replied, "Yes, my lady." Persephone sighed and rolled her eyes, but kept her smile, as she recalled their old code used to hide their intimacy before their affair was known. It was how he said it and held her eyes when he did that made the phrase mean so much more than just the words and the "I love you" they implied. She turned, carelessly swinging her arms out to the side in a very unsoldierly way, and sarcastically pontificated, "Lead on, good captain. My mother dear awaits my presence with bated breath, no doubt." Samson went his own way and was at CEO Philip Kroinos' office almost before he remembered how to breathe. The unique reception that he received in the Empire SEO's office immediately put him on edge. When Samson entered, the grizzled retired guardsman who occupied the CO's desk stood behind that desk and barked, "High Commander, park your ass in that chair." He was pointing at the single chair on the side of the expansive carved hardwood desk, to the right of the CO's own chair. Even more disturbing was that the famously technophobe CEO actually had a single-use standalone, non-networked, disposable computer terminal on his desk, next to the ubiquitous pitcher of chilled water and glasses. The way CEO Philip Kroinos saw it, if it wasn't important enough for someone to hand-carry to him in print form, so he could rip their face off if it wasn't important enough for his attention, it didn't belong on his desk. That allowed him to actually work on hegemony and corporate important things. Instead of being like some CEOs and submerged in puerile waves of electronic messages from every sycophant and underling with too much time on their hands and a keyboard, CEO Kroinos could actually work on advancing their corporate interests. There was no point in a man in his position sifting through crap for 18 hours a day. It was his job to lead the empire, not coddle indecisive incompetents who failed to lead the family's subordinate corporate divisions to long-term sustainability and profitability for their shareholders. CEO Philip Kroinos was famous and feared for his rants on the subject. He was a guardsman and an intimidating physical presence. Had someone pissed him off to the point of a public rant, they were usually cleaning out their desk after the rant was finished. That was often a fate worse than death at the CEO and vice president levels, to have climbed so high only to fail so publicly. The CEO snapped to his squad of guardsmen. "Get your mangy asses out of here." The burn-scared major, who headed the squad, snapped a crisp salute, pulling his rifle up from its slung position and snapping it across his face. With a nod pulling his nose across the rest of them and towards the door, they were all on the way out the single door to CEO Kroinos' office without a word passing between the 8 of them. The door closed behind the last of the guardsmen as they all leapt. Samson sat as instructed as the CEO's eyes flicked to the water. He said to the air, "Stop transcription. Stop all recording. Report when complete." Several seconds passed before there was a click over concealed speakers. "Done, sir." "All inbound lines are deactivated to your current room. You will hear the click when we close here. Step outside the room to reactivate the system." Philip replied automatically, "Thank you." It was followed immediately by the clicking pop that signified every circuit in the room, including the speakers, closing. Inaudible to human hearing were the white noise generators. Philip glanced down at the pitcher of water he kept on his desk, just as he did every time that he secured the room, to see that the anti-bugging field was indeed working and vibrating the water in his pitcher. The ultrasonic and subsonic sound waves would bludgeon any potential listening devices into a totally overloaded feedback state and would most likely destroy them in the process. Philip looked down at the seated Samson. For the first time in many months they were both in each other's presence, once again in a professional capacity. It is something else entirely when you are eating brunch in a 5-star dive that is pirating the electricity which Philip's primary company produced, and when you are in the hospital ward downstairs. Both of these were relatively informal because of the setting and people's physical conditions. That was all turned on its head when the two were in their respective uniforms, one in his new black and gold, the other in his custom-tailored 3-piece suit with gold cuff-links and buttons. The CEO stood while he drummed his fingers on the desk, looking down at Samson. "Samson?" he asked quietly, with none of his mimed anger from when he kicked out his guard squad, just as he had done with Guardsman Mountain in their private conversation before sending him on the mission to find Samson and Persephone in order to keep her safe. He repeated, "Samson, I need to look in your eyes and ask you this, man to man. What is between yourself and my daughter?" Taken aback by the simplicity of the question, Samson felt his head recoil in confusion as he unconsciously blinked several times. He answered immediately, "I love her." The CEO coaxed, and Samson didn't know what to say, but instead heard his words tumbling out of his flapping mouth unbidden. "I love her. I want nothing more in life than to see her happy in all things. I want to be with her every day for the rest of my life and give her my heart and soul. I would die to keep her safe. She means the world to me." Philip Kroinos grunted noncommittally. "That sounds familiar." He sighed while his eyes fell shut for a second and his brow popped up as he decided something for himself. Well, nothing can be done about that. That's all more or less the same as what my daughter says, or said all those months ago when you returned her from her first set of escapades. And to answer that question floating in your eyes, yes, we did pull your image out of the crowd watching her come in that day. We had to go into outside systems and pull their feeds, but we eventually got you. You got away clean at the time. Too much time had elapsed for us to track you two down when we sent her back out to you. We were definitely fortunate with that little bit. He was obviously referring to his brother and nephew's treason that had almost killed his daughter and last surviving child. The CEO smoothly changed subjects as he slowly sat in his carved wood chair. I suppose that since, as Celine has stated, that you're healthy enough to get, what was her word, frisky with my daughter a few minutes ago, that you're healthy enough to be put to work. He smiled his lopsided gonna make trouble grin. I guess I can do the same with my fretting daughter now too, since she too was healthy enough to participate in being frisky, so bring yourself over here and look at this. He crooked his finger from Samson to point to the display screen as he turned it so Samson could see it from his seat. Philip continued casually as if he was about to discuss raindrops. This was recorded by our Guardsman satellites in deep orbit around Luculinus. Samson was confused. The name was vaguely familiar, but the tragedy there had happened when he was only a mid-level student at the Guardsman Academy. At the time he had more important things to worry about than distant planets. He had his own studies. He remembered reading about the planet years later, in his self-assigned preparatory reading when he was first assigned to the family. He recalled that CEO Kroinos' sister had died there in some sort of environmental catastrophe that had wiped the planet clean. Before he thought it all the way through, he said, "Where your sister died, sir?" The retired guardsman nodded once in the affirmative. Samson stated, "I thought that the exact cause of that catastrophe was unknown." Kroinos scoffed, "Sure. It's amazing what nuggets history retains when I wanted to say one thing versus another." He continued much less cryptically, "All our important planets have deep space optical telescopes above the system's elliptical that passively monitor the system. So yes, we have it. To answer your next question, no one knows about it. Knowledge of our observation satellites is reserved for Warsong's command group, which is why they change out so infrequently. The Guardsman High Commander, that's you now, and the Kroinos Corporate Holding Company's CEO and Executive Vice President. No one else has the knowledge. The emergency codes are secured in escrow vaults passed from one to the next. There is even a complicated protocol to pass it on if all three position legs, CEO, VP, and High Commander, are suddenly killed at the same time. Warsong should be counted in there too, but still, if all are destroyed at the same time, there are contingencies in place to pass control of that intelligence asset. Those eventualities are intentionally convoluted, to say the least, thanks to that little bit of security paranoia put in place by my grandfather. My late brother never got his hands on this information to pass on to his missing ne'er-do-well son." Kroinos sighed, letting his eyelids and shoulders fall. Samson realized he was stalling for some reason. CEO Kroinos was suddenly merely human at the thought of the recent betrayal and loss. After that brief pause, he opened his eyes with their usual superhuman strength and hardness. He continued, "Today you gain the knowledge of the system's existence and will watch using my codes." Kroinos changed directions slightly before ducking back onto the course. "We will write your personal codes after we finish here." Samson now realized the CEO was stalling because he didn't want to rewatch whatever was on the satellite's capture. He steeled himself against what he might see and reverted to his cold professional armor. Philip Kroinos pressed play on what was obviously an image from a passive light deep system telescope looking down on the planet Luculinus. The planet was a fractional light mass in the deep star-filled black of space. Through the enhancement of the captured images with an obviously subsequent red box drawn around the speck of light, the star field itself pulled back into the upper left quad of the screen and shrank a little more beyond that quarter. The enhancement of the image zoomed through vast distances of space like the viewer was walking rapidly down a darkened hallway to a glowing point that resolved into a pristine and lustrously beautiful vacation paradise world. The topography of the world was a vaguely familiar image to Samson. It was a memory pulled hazily from a young teenager's recollection of a few rarely viewed news vid-mentions that passed in his youth over 25 years before. There were also a few articles he read about the place when reading the history of the family he was assigned to serve years later in his career. Even the last assignment's preparation had been over a decade earlier. To Philip the images evoked a hardened set to his grizzled exterior as the unhealed quarter-century-old wound of the murder of his baby sister, her family, and the planet around them was revisited. The massive starship snapped into a position only 100 kilometers away from the outbound lanes of the planet's sole customs dock, in a very ballsy and highly dangerous bit of piloting. The planet was very remote, so traffic was light for a habitable world. Since all visitors and immigrants to the planet passed through customs before dropping to the surface of the planet, all the space traffic was located within a few kilometers of the dock. The action paused for a span of 15 seconds as an enhanced image of the warship filled the screen. That warship was scrubbed of exterior markings of every kind and painted a flat sensor-absorbent black. The video then dropped back into the action, and its motion resumed. The instantaneous speed and ruthless efficiency with which the battleship identified, targeted, and engaged the civilian liners preparing to exit the system was staggering. It ruthlessly targeted from farthest out to deepest into the planet's gravity well. Its priority targets obviously the ships closest to leaving the system so none could escape their massive raking firepower. The battleship shredded their unshielded, unarmored, and unarmed hulls. It then smoothly shifted fire inward into inbound jump-capable traffic before any could turn and escape. That was followed by instantly vaporizing the planet's patrol cutters and defensive network, and finally focusing fire on the unarmed stationary customs station. The ruthless precision and accuracy could only have been managed by a skillfully pre-programmed gunnery computer. It took less than 2 minutes for the battleship to rip open the hulls of the half-dozen slow-moving outbound liners. In that brief instant, when the aggressor reached out with kinetic energy weapons to crack those ships, its smaller lasers pecked at critical components, disabling the targeted ship's jump drives and then communications. Each of those massive liners carried tens of thousands of crew and passengers who were spilled into the cold vacuum of space surrounded by flame. Their fragile bodies were instantly shredded by super-accelerated and superheated liquid metal, and an instant later flash frozen. The battleship's gunnery exercise continued with murderous intent as it walked its way along its automated command priorities. Samson realized that it smashed those targets before its multitude of lasers turned on the smaller components of the destroyed ships, ensuring that components were reduced to rubble, and any electronics capable of recording the aggression were ruthlessly destroyed. The battleship first destroyed the station's communications arrays, and then walked its kinetic energy weapons from outside to the inside of the station, vaporizing enormous chunks. Its lasers persistently flashed out into the rubble field, destroying tumbling components that could contain electronics capable of recording the atrocity. Samson mumbled clinically, "No wonder you never released this. Look at the ruthless efficiency they are using to smash every piece of tech in orbit from those ships." The ruthless professional continued to speak while the CEO remained silent. "I bet they did the same with the satellites, both defensive and civilian, first before turning their weapons on the gravity well and doing the same with the surface. There is no long-range message capability from system to system, so they didn't have to worry about smashing the station's communications. They only had to worry about destroying all craft capable of exiting the system. Everyone else would be trapped there with no way to communicate with the outside universe. There is no way that this couldn't be intentional genocide, or they wouldn't take so much care in the early stages. This is all smoothly planned, violently executed, and flawlessly coordinated. Samson nodded as blossoms of fire ripped along the length of the energy screens protecting the warship. Samson commented noncommittally, "They're weathering the storm. See how they're deliberately ignoring the defensive system's fire while absorbing the damage until they can destroy all means of messaging the outside world and coincidentally escape for the population. The planet's not big enough to warrant a defensive platform, so it's only ground-based fighters and guns they have to worry about." Samson spoke with all the millennium of weighted military euphemism. "Interesting." Forgotten until he spoke, CEO Kroinos confirmed. "Keep watching. You are correct. Our initial assessment was that it was an assassination gone wrong. Once they went overboard, they decided to finish the job. The full video feed turned that theory on its head. It was planned this way from the start. Like most worlds, the custom station was in geosynchronous orbit above the planet's largest population centers. The straight line is the shortest distance for the vast majority of passengers, making that the most economical position for the custom station and its planet-bound flight. The several 100,000 habited corporate worlds all came to more or less the same profit-based conclusion independent of each other. Once the station was whittled to nothing, the bombardment ravaged the city below. The battleship began making pinpoint blasts on the equatorial city. Blasts whose exact destinations were obscured by the planet's elliptic curve and the steep downward angle of the satellite's view from the northern pole. The murderous warship gracefully glided into an orbit counter to the planet's rotation. CEO Kroinos coldly mentioned, "This is the coup de grace." Samson understood that what would follow would be the volley that killed Alana Kroinos and her family. The battleship unleashed 3 waves of violent, focused volleys into the surface of the planet. Samson cringed and sat forward, not believing what he saw. It looked for an instant like the planet was an orange that someone had pressed with a knuckle before the surface rippled back out. CEO Kroinos confirmed, "Yes, you saw that right. They cracked the crust of the planet with that volley of kinetic rounds." It was a small but relatively young world, as planets go. Small so it cooled faster when it formed. It was still liquid in its relatively stable core and geologically had a relatively thin crust and mantle. It was a nice little oddity of nature that we picked up and developed because the low gravity, mild tropical to temperate climate, and stability made for a perfect vacation playground world. Samson shook his head at the horrific imagery of a planet destined to die. 2 more concentrated volleys followed the first into the Kroinos compound, each one replicating and amplifying the wave of the first strike, each ripple representing massive earthquakes caused by the kinetic rounds splashing into the crust of the planet. The hemisphere view showed several long, extinct volcanoes rumbling silently to life as little more than darkening plumes of ash on the screen. Samson knew on an intellectual level that those volcanoes blossoming red-orange and black on the planet were making thunderous noise, but given the distance through the vacuum of space where no sound traveled, he had to suffer with the sounds he imagined fitting the images. CEO Kroinos tapped a single key and the assault smoothly accelerated to 5 times the speed. They watched for a few minutes, and he tapped the key again. The second command set the playback speed up all the way up to 20 times the normal speed. They watched for the next 20 minutes as the titanic power of the warship shredded the surface of the pristine vacation world that had once been Lucullinus. In a little under 7 hours, the blue-green paradise was transformed into a sulphurous and volcanic wasteland of poisoned air and boiling seas as the warship passed over the surface again and again, blasting anything that stood out to its gunners. Kroinos asked, "Comments?" Samson shrugged and spoke his assessment without hesitation or emotion, methodical and purpose-driven. That was a carefully coordinated assault designed to exterminate the planet from the start. Were I going to plan it, that execution is more detailed and developed than anything I could have come up with. The old warrior nodded, sagely understanding the implications just beneath the surface of that comment. He asked carefully, "And?" Samson's eyes flicked up from the terminal phases of the planet's devastation as they unfolded on the screen to Kroinos. "And I think it's a bloody waste, sir. There's no honor in killing civilians like that. It's just a callous, industrialized slaughter." The CEO knew his subordinates' views on the subject of war and individual martial prowess from personal contact over many years of his service in the family's personal guard. That was only reinforced by his high commander's brutal exhibition, no more than 48 hours before, that was broadcast via live vid to their entire world. He took a moment to shake his head while thinking about that brutally fought grudge match broadcast to the whole planet and currently making its way off the world on every ship that could take its registered distribution copies to outlying systems' vid networks. He prompted, "How would you deal with the people who did this?" Samson instantly objected. "You know I wouldn't waste civilians like that. You know exactly why I think that there is no honor in it." The CEO chastened his young subordinate. "You didn't answer the question I asked. You answered your own morality on the subject. Now, how would you deal with the people who did this?" Samson sighed at his own momentary stupidity, feeling like a foolish child, and reconsidered the question. "First off, I wouldn't do what they did. Glassing a planet is nothing but a reprehensible atrocity and should be punished in detail. Second, I'd like to drag them through the streets and publicly humiliate them before packing them off for Earth. I'd like to put those useless Earth bureaucrats to work and have the perpetrators judged on the genocide and force these people to pay reparations to the descendants of every man, woman, and child lost on that planet. This is obviously a corporate imperial power to be able to field a capital ship of that size. I'm obviously speculating because we can't know what empire that ship belongs to who sent it on this mission, or even if it was only working as a for-hire mercenary. The mercenary guild will be seriously pissed if they find out one of their members violated their agreements with Earth about reporting on and halting all atrocities. Their contracts all have escape clauses stating payment is due in full, but services are terminated if atrocities are committed by the hiring party. So, I don't think it would have been one of theirs. Were they hired to do this, they could take the money and walk while reporting the employer without getting their hands dirty, which is the mercenary guild's way of collecting the most money with the least work. Not that they ever bother with battleships, too much maintenance, too much risk fielding them, and not enough profit. It takes the established power and, the ego of a corporatized empire to field one of those ships. However, I think that we would need to deal with at least one empire both militarily and legally in the Earth courts for the genocide and reparations. Never mind the repayments for the destruction of assets and the costs of special dispensation from Earth for re-terraforming the planet. That will just be a mess. First, there is the legal wrangling which will take the better part of a year just to get representatives from Earth to the site to confirm the genocide matches our evidence. Then the summons to Earth courts will take months of travel time out and back to Earth again. The trial could take the better part of a year at least. Once that is finished extracting the assets from the criminals, converting those assets to hard currency enough for the Earth bribes, and finally the years it will take to actually get around to terraforming. What a bloody mess, sir. Philip growled in a gruffly angry and forceful voice. Why do you think we haven't touched that world in a quarter century and have had it under quarantine that whole time? You don't think that Tomies and I haven't thought of all that too, did you? Samson nodded in understanding as the accelerated video passed the 7-hour 45-minute mark on what was the real-time counter of the genocide. You knew someone attacked this world to get at your sister, but you had to sit on the recording for so many years because the Earth types in the terraforming courts wouldn't do anything without having the world in question sitting ready for their own investigators to pick over it. And since their laws of evidence require that the grieved party present verifiable evidence, that means you as CEO need to do all the investigating. Wonderful. What a bloody mess this is turning out to be. Samson grumped in turn. How the hell can we possibly fix this? Philip Kroinos smiled an evil smile and used another old soldier's euphemism. Funny you should ask. He pointed to the scene of the warship turning to leave the system as just under 8 hours of butchery played to a close on the machine on his desk. CEO Kroinos tapped his left breast pocket looking for something's weight. Satisfied, he said, "Now look at this video that the captain of Warsong brought back from Tommy's last visit to Earth." He fiddled with a new chit that he palmed from the pocket of his suit while they finished watching the ruthless glassing. He popped the first chip out of the machine and slid the second from his pocket into the disposable player's port. The player was a version with no internal memory or storage functions, just enough hard-coded programming to perform its single-use function before disposal or recycling. Data could never be retrieved from this type of machine regardless of effort without the original detachable memory chips used to store the video or data recordings. Given the brutally horrific nature of the atrocity that had just played out and the equally horrific secret that had burdened Philip Kroinos for so many years, the secure nature of the machine now made eminent sense. A peacefully beautiful scene of packed but well-managed space traffic unfolded as the new scene began to play around what was obviously Earth. Clearly evident around that world were the terrifyingly powerful defensive platforms with their mutually supporting fields of fire around the whole planet. They were armored stations so large that they qualified as moons, had they not been hollowed to provide quarters for sailors and everything else required to perform their deadly functions. Each station maintained many times the firepower of the one battleship that the last video showed glassing luckiness. Each station was far too large to move under its own power between the stars. That coincidentally allowed each station to forego the requirements for propulsion and the power plant to support propulsion so they could field more dedicated and redundant power plants for shielding and weaponry instead. An interesting trade-off that made Earth's power projection outside the system pathetic. But within the system, that ring of 12.5 mutually supporting stations made any aggression against humanity's home world suicidal at best. Earth had made the decision to abandon the stars millennia before, when they realized that they couldn't make the extraterrestrial corporations bow to their will through the Empire. The distances and times were just too great to effectively administer. The ship drives of the time were too slow, and the spread of worlds rapidly became too vast, as the Terraforming Commission Corporation efficiently outpaced the ability of Earth governance to keep up. But they could sure as hell make those corporations wholly dependent on Earth for new worlds to colonize. That way they didn't have to patrol and administer the vast reaches of space. Earth, through the Terraforming Commission, used guidelines and agreements that established the framework of law in the corporate world. Earth set the minimum standards and acted as the final arbiter to all those who could weather the bureaucracy and afford the necessary bribes functionaries demanded as a tribute to do their jobs. At the same time, those corporations would be inexorably tied to Earth and forced to pay tribute to each of those new worlds. Security was their own problem way out in the corporate worlds, as Earth called them. A staggering tribute sum that was a fraction of the value of those eventually developed systems, but a tribute nonetheless, and it was a tribute from thousands of corporations, all vying for a mere hundreds of systems per year. Earth has run things like that for thousands of years now. With the Terraforming Commission's iron-clad terraforming patents, the interlaced connections of the mercenary guild that was not coincidentally based on Earth, and enormous bounties paid to informants who uncovered corporations infringing on the Commission's patents, Earth was secure as the center of the human universe. The corporate empires chafed under the onerous restrictions and requirements placed on them by the bureaucratic center of the universe, origin of all red tape and stupidity. The mega-corporations wanted to pay fealty to no overlords. They believed that they could act as vastly more efficient administrators of all things. Samson had always considered that an irony. His employer did the same to smaller core and subordinate worlds, but chafed at the same happening from above. He didn't think he saw the whole picture, but imagined that the truth lay somewhere in between. If Earth wanted to chasten a corporate empire, all they had to do was delay or suspend a few permits for new worlds. Given the substantial investment each permit represented, even the threat of delay would have shareholders up in arms and ready to replace the corporate leadership. If Earth wanted to hurt a corporate empire, all they had to do was have a few choice words with the mercenary guild, and suddenly auxiliary mercenary units that corporations depended upon to bolster their own strength would be suddenly committed elsewhere when it was time to renew contracts. If Earth wanted to crush a corporate empire, they could simply deny new worlds for a few decades. Any new worlds that came available at that time would be so far removed from that corporation's power base that they'd blanch at the thought of paying to develop and then almost instantly losing them militarily. The offending corporation would simply wither and die naturally as it expended resources just to stay competitive. All the while its competitors grew strong around it. Eventually, they would be consumed naturally. To the Terraforming Commission and its near-geological time perspective, the corporate empires were fleeting, to say the least. The Commission counted their longevity in terms of millennia, while corporations counted by quarter, CEO tenures, and shifting controlling interest ownerships. The Commission could easily take the view of natural selection among the outer solar systems. They had formed several 100,000 solar systems. They produce 1,000 more habitable solar systems every year. They kept tens of thousands of active customer corporations in their files, along with millions more vying for that attention and prestige, should one of those massive empires stumble or fail. A corporate dynasty to the Commission might as well have been a flake of dandruff washed away in a shower for all they cared. All they had to do was wait, and most problems they had in the corporatized worlds would sort themselves out naturally. They generally saw no need to interfere or fret over the goings-on in the deep black outside their immediate domain. Samson wanted to cringe at the thought of Earth's insidious control over those outside their solar system. At the same time, he also marveled at the elegant simplicity of the system that kept humanity inexorably tied together, with Earth as the center of the universe. The corporations and empires chafed under what they considered Earth's yoke. Earth, on the other hand, feared and distrusted the purely profit-centered motivations of the empires. It was a heck of a paradox, but it was a paradox that had lasted successfully for thousands of years. His sidebar thoughts crashed to a halt as the image from Warsong's panoramic camera slipped smoothly into encompassing a very familiar warship slipping even more gracefully into one of Earth's customs docks. Samson jumped in his chair as he recognized the murderous vessel and painfully slammed his undamaged left knee into the side of the desk. Samson exclaimed, forgetting his knee completely, "Son of a bitch!" Kroinos nodded quietly before mumbling, "Indeed," between Samson's emphatic and his following questions. Samson demanded, "Is that the same ship? And isn't that White Star Corporation's diplomatic insignia?" Kroinos answered in the affirmative. "Yes, it is. And yes, it is." Samson couldn't believe what he was hearing and demanded more. "You've sat on this first data chip for 20 years plus and didn't say anything about that ship?" CEO Kroinos glared at his high commander as if the man had suddenly turned stupid. "What would you have me do? I knew then that someone had infiltrated our networks because the bunker that was destroyed, during a plan that obviously knew our security procedures for that system well enough to know that my sister would be in that bunker as soon as hostile action arrived in the system." He was so pissed off he actually condescended to Samson by telling him the obvious. "In the glassing that killed my sister, and the planet along with her, was close-hold information. You don't think we randomly publish security procedures or post pictures and schematics for secret security bunkers to the casual eye, do you?" He could have been mistaken for being nearly sarcastic, if it weren't for the inferno of latent anger that glowed behind the old warrior's eyes. I couldn't exactly fly off the handle and start showing images of the ship, asking, "Has anyone seen this mystery ship?" The enemy would triangulate the satellite's position from the images and determine the approximate location of the viewing satellite based on the date and timing of the image, where they were and the parallax, planet's position, and star fields from the background of the image. They would locate our satellite and know where to and what to look for with all our other stealth Guardsman monitor satellites. He chewed his lower lip and visibly worked to calm himself before he continued, "Since I didn't know where the leak was, or even that we actually had a traitor in the family," his resignation firmed, "I couldn't chase it with the fervor I would have liked." Samson nodded as the prudence of the patient hunter's decision became apparent through his own affronted honor and anger at the genocide. He grumbled, "Fair enough." Samson changed to speculative. "Since you're telling me now, I assume that you have changed your mind on that, and you are now willing to pursue justice with all of the Incorporated Empire's resources, especially since you have asked me how I would handle the operation." CEO Kroinos accepted Samson's guesses. For the most part, that was well put. CEO Kroinos took a moment to lean back in his chair and wave a correcting finger between the two men before dropping it to pick at a suit fold over his knee. "However, nothing has changed as you just stated. Instead, with this new development, I should say developments, of cracking open the treason and identifying the ship and empire responsible for the genocide, we can now move from planning phases into execution phases." He nodded confidently as he sat straighter in his hard-backed chair and pushed his palms down his pant legs. "And yes, I am confident that we can pull the rest of the traitorous elements out by the roots, now that the individual who was once my brother isn't there to shield their actions, and his immoral little whelp is missing presumably on the run. In addition to your rank and role commanding the Guardsman as High Commander, I want you in charge of our house security." Samson balked for a second at the additional tasks and duties he was just assigned, but prudently remained silent while he thought. He didn't even know how to be a high commander, and now he was having another executive-level set of duties thrust into his lap like a scalding hot cup of spilling coffee. His trepidation faded a little as he asked with a little more confidence, nearing a subject he understood and knew he was capable of performing. Quote, "And you want me to continue the mission you gave me in the letter you sent with Persephone all those months ago?" Kroinos nodded decisively. "Yes, use every resource we have." I want you to hunt them down to the individual level, unravel their organizations, and destroy them all in detail, root and branch. I want anyone directly involved exterminated, and their accomplice vetted and punished accordingly. Now here is the hair in that particular ointment. While I do charge you with that task, your restrictions are such that we still don't know how deep the rot in our intelligence apparatus runs. I want you to set up and run a parallel network using assets that you pull in and develop on your own. I want our overt-covert operations section working as they normally would, clunking along and making all the normal noise that section should. So our traders and their ears in our organization think things are still normal. I want their eyes and ears in that organization functional so that they are focused on that threat and not you. But I want you to set up a covert ops section. Small, discreet looking at oddities, thinking outside of the box, and employing unconventional methods to attack from a different angle so that that dishonorable rat doesn't see you coming. Samson knew right away who that dishonorable rat was. Casimir was the only one that they really knew of at the moment. Samson replied crisply, "Yes, sir." He considered for a moment before suggesting, "Sir, I would like to recommend that you install Persephone as the head of the currently vacated Intelligence Services Director position. She is known as popular and fair but tough. She has a natural flair for human intelligence and enjoys playing the game." Kroinos immediately made a grumbling sound in his throat while drumming his fingers on the carved arm of his chair. He paused after a moment, flattened his hands, and Samson could see him considering the request. He asked mildly, "Are you sure?" Samson actually smiled and relaxed into the chair. He had the gall to smile at the CEO like a tutor smiling to a favorite student who should know the answer. "Sir, she routinely snuck out of the Citadel by circumventing the security checks. She only got caught sneaking back in that last time after she joined me because she wanted to stick it in your craw and annoy you. And even then, she snuck out at will with no help and intentionally took an air cab back to the front gate, landing in the middle of all those reporters just to salt your wound. And she did it again on her last time sneaking out. Granted, she did it with your help, but she did walk right through the redoubled security after the assassination attempt on her life. She told me she changed in front of her mother before she left, so you could probably ask Lady Selene if Persephone was convincing." Philip Kroinos, the father of the spoiled, irritating little girl who appeared to be a full-grown woman of 25, grumbled, "Good point. Selene and I have already had that particular conversation, and apparently Persephone's transformation was quite a shock." Samson began carefully. "Sir, can I ask you?" Samson paused for more nerves than to collect his thoughts. "Can I ask you about Persephone?" Interrupting him in his unsure pause with a dismissive wave of his hand, "Selene and I have already discussed that too. I know my wife. I'll bet she's reading that petulant little child the riot act right now for the stunt she just pulled. But hell, keep her. After that display you two put on Friday night, no one else in the Empire will want to touch her for equal parts, knowing she'll never be theirs and abject fear of you. There's not a male in the Incorporated Empire that would dare fight you for Persephone's hand after that display. No one." He paused to correct himself. "Very few people knew the extent of the bad blood between you and Alexios. That knowledge is fairly well contained within the ranks of the Guardsmen. Even more so, it was mostly contained to those Guardsmen who served with you both here in the Citadel. And we Guardsmen don't talk outside our ranks about internal issues, let alone do we ever air the family's dirty laundry. Outside of Guardsmen ranks, the family and Tomies knew about your distaste for Alexios, and very few top personal aides who worked with the family directly every day had some inkling. Most people who saw you, even those who had met you personally, had no idea the scale and animosity involved in that grudge match. They all just think that you are certifiably insane, with a very short fuse, and looking for the next notch in your sword hilt. Samson was now decidedly uncomfortable. What about Persephone's matrimonial contract? Philip Kroinos drummed his fingers on the arm of his chair impatiently. The girl's father snapped. Samson, don't be stupid. Do you really think that I could give her away to anyone who was born before last Friday night and have them not painfully aware of where her heart and loyalties lay? Do you actually think I'd be dumb enough to insult anyone's intelligence like that? Let alone see my daughter profoundly unhappy with some spineless fool with the complete lack of personal dignity that it would require of them to obsequiously accept a position like that. Samson was starting to feel like a condemned man. He had gone from trying to carefully feel out his prospects with Persephone to suddenly feeling like he was being reeled in on a giant hook. I suppose not, sir. CEO Kroinos could smell the weakness and trepidation seeping from the other man's every pore, so he redoubled his frontal assault. She's yours. You two have been involved under our very noses since she was 18, and you two have pretty much lived as husband and wife for more than 3/4 of the last year, while you two were together on the run. Even if you have been recovering from wounds in the infirmary bed, and then hemming and hawing over this since we scooped you up after last Friday, some of us have been working 20-hour days that whole time. Bryce has been fully debriefed. Samson was crestfallen. He had forgotten about Guardsman Mountain. Oh, I see, sir. Philip waved off Samson's idiocy. Don't worry about him. You're the one in trouble, but not for the reasons you're thinking about right now. The Empire maintains the old common law marriage traditions, since you two have lived together for the last 6 months or more. You, my new son-in-law, are considered legally married according to the laws and traditions of the Empire, and on top of meeting all the legal qualifications, you two have made public your profession of love for each other, in so much of a spectacular fashion that no one can deny your mutual oaths to one another. Samson was stunned silent before mumbling, and the family obligation, Persephone's planned union? Philip waved that potentially ruinous question aside. Nothing to be done about that for now. The damage is done. House Kroinos. Philip Kroinos grumbled fiercely into his own paws before jamming his thumb into his own chest, and using the royal we to describe himself. We are in breach, and truth be told, that's the least of my worries. I'm so much more worried about the possibilities of civil war, foreign invasion, traitorous assaults, institutionalized rot, a schism within our military chain of command, and dynastic collapse right now that Persephone's obviously void contract is the last thing on my mind. Philip grumbled more to himself than Samson. That little contractual breach problem I can throw money at to fix. The rest are major festering political wounds that are literally fatal if left unattended, and I can't buy my way out of those. Philip looked up from talking to himself in front of Samson, before revealing a feral smile. As far as I'm concerned, young man, Persephone is now your problem until death do you part, my dear son-in-law. Samson bit the inside of his lip as he struggled with the conflicting emotions of overwhelming joy at getting everything he wanted and more, and the soldier's screaming instinct that he was walking into a trap. Plus, he had the suspicion that Persephone would figure out some way to make both of them, Samson and Philip, equally crazy before long.
Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate your listening. When you get a chance, please come and hit the like, subscribe, leave a comment, and check out the book for real down in the description.